Welcome to the Self Within podcast, where we will look to ancient traditions and modern insights to seek guidance, knowledge, and practical tools to help us reconnect with our true selves. Join me, your host, as we explore various topics from mindfulness and meditation to energy healing, astrology, and much more. We'll hear from experts and everyday individuals to explore the connections that exist between mind, body, and spirit, and how we can use them for personal growth. Today, we are going to be talking about the doshas. We're going to get into Ayurveda. And I am really happy to be talking to our guest. Her name is Rachel Warnock, and she is an Ayurvedic herbalist, founder of Impact Botanicals, and also teacher at the Boston School of Herbal Studies. So, welcome, Rachel.
Hi, Annabelle. It's so great to join you today. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And it's so funny because you and I met just a couple of weeks ago, if I'm honest.
Yes.
And it was at the Natural Living Expo in Marlborough, which I love going to because I get to attend so many different workshops and events and hear from awesome experts and speakers in their field like yourself. And I
hmm
remember looking through the booklet that we get every year and oh, there's so many different ones to choose from. And this one really drew my attention because it was titled Living in Harmony, Ideal Days, Ideal Seasons. And okay, being a Libra myself, I am all about finding balance in life. I think it's a misconception that Libras are already balanced. So I'm like, okay, I'm all about the balance. And I really know very little about Ayurveda. It's definitely a term that I've heard it used, especially in kind of the circle of people that I follow on social media and just I think the areas that I'm interested in, but very little information about it. So I'd love to learn how to use this practice to really live in harmony, because I think that's something that at the end of the day, we all want it. It's hard to achieve, but
Yeah. No, thank you. I'm really happy to get into that. So, as you were saying, the lecture that I gave at the Natural Living Expo was about Ayurveda, but specifically this concept in Ayurveda called Dinacharya, which is your ideal routine, your ideal day. So, in Ayurveda, we look at the doshas, and the doshas, it's a fancy word for the elements, if we can
mm,
translate that. So, there's the fire element, pitta, there's the air element, vata, and then there is the earth element, kapha. And I'm oversimplifying that a little bit just to get to the juicy parts, but we look at vata, pitta, and kapha that governs balance in your body. The doshas have an impact on weather, and we also look at this concept that the doshas govern different times and stages in our life, and they also govern different times of the day. And so that was a lot of what I was lecturing on. That is one of the biggest Ayurvedic teachings, I think. You don't have to get into the doshas quite so much. You don't have to totally understand diet and herbs and all of these different things. If you just understand the simple concept of the hours, of which hours does your body naturally want to rest? Does your body have the energy to be focused and get something done? And the hours where your body wants to be unstructured and be social and play. So yeah, I'd love to get into that with you today.
there's so many jumping off points from there because I love the elements. And as an astrologer, it is one of the foundational things that we typically look at. So I want to get into that. But before we go there, for
Sure.
people that don't even know what Ayurveda is,
Yeah.
like what is Ayurveda?
Great question. Thank you for zooming out. Ayurveda is a traditional medical paradigm. It's indigenous to South Asia. The word translates to the science of life or the wisdom of living well. So it's a traditional medical paradigm that's 5,000 years old, practiced in Pakistan, in India, in Bangladesh, in Nepal, basically all of South Asia. It has influences from the Middle East and from Africa in its materia medica, but it is this understanding of living in harmony with the seasons, of living with the plants, of how diet affects our bodies, of how to eat well so that medicine isn't needed. Like that's a big
Mm.
Ayurvedic saying is that when diet is correct, medicine is not necessary. And it's a system of seasonal cleansing too. Ayurveda is really rich. They have some of the most sophisticated organ cleanses and detoxification methods that have been practiced for millennia. We now have some scientific understanding of that, but Ayurvedic cleansing methods are some of the best at removing like the endocrine disruptors from our system, from
Mhm.
removing heavy metals from our system. So all of these things that are really difficult to detox, Ayurveda has been working on that and really developing a science around that for 5,000 years. So it's a system of cleanses, it's a system of diet, it's a system of medicine, and it's a system of living well, is really what Ayurveda is.
It's funny with the cleanses thing because we live in a world where there are so many different types of cleanses.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a bit of a trend. Like
Oh,
we're all
yeah.
trying to detox from something. And you're detoxing from social media or alcohol or
Yeah.
whatever we want to cleanse out
Right.
our bodies out. And so I like that this could potentially be this natural way of doing it and of
Mhm.
looking at it. And I have to admit, I was at Barnes and Nobles yesterday doing some Christmas shopping. And of course, I'm like, where's your health and wellness section? And I found a book. It was The Idiot's Guide to Ayurveda. And I'm like, okay, I'm having this talk with you, right? So I bought the book. I'm like, I'm not going to be knowledgeable in a couple hours, but I'll just get it and I can skim through it when I need to. And as I'm checking out, the lady at the counter says to me, she's like, I really like the idea of this concept, but I can't fully prescribe to it because I just can't see myself giving up ice cream or whatever it was. I think it was ice cream because I have to admit, most people have a hard time giving up dairy. It's a
It's
indulgent
hard.
thing. But yeah, but I digress. That was just a funny little interaction I had with this woman. And I thought, I could see that too, because I'm very much about living life. We're only here once,
Mhm.
essentially. Let's enjoy the experience. But I'm also very health conscious. And I also like to try to incorporate where I can and make small adjustments to living better or feeling better because sometimes we have those moments when we're sluggish or we're like digestive issues or whatever it is. And if this could be a way of at least helping to alleviate, I'm so
Yeah.
down.
Absolutely. No, and when I was working one-on-one with patients, I would always say, hey man, there's a smart way to be stupid, right? If you want to
Yeah.
have the ice cream, there's a smart way to do it where you can limit the negative impact on your body. So you can still have your cake and eat it too. Because I agree with
Mm,
you. We should be enjoying life. I'm not partial to austerities. I That's not how I live.
right.
But there's good knowledge to be had to like limit. And so that way, when you do choose to have the ice cream, you're choosing to have it on a hot summer day when pitta is at its strongest, right? So your fire is at its strongest. Maybe you're having ginger ice cream. So there's some heat in there, or like ginger turmeric ice cream, which not too many people make. That is not a very common flavor, but if you were, it's my favorite. And it
Yeah.
is like giving that little heat with the dairy. And then you're gonna drink warm water. A lot of warm water afterwards, so that really stokes your digestive fire. You might have some herbs to help break it down. Like you're doing the things to support your body in the way that it needs to be supported to digest and process this very heavy thing. And so I think that's another power of Ayurveda is just knowing how to counteract the harm so that you can have your cake and eat it, right? And there's a balance element in there, like where you don't have to restrict yourself. You just have to know how to come at it from the other angle as well.
Oh, okay. That makes so much sense. And I love
Yeah.
hearing that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm all about awareness, turning on the observer, being fully aware of like your
Yeah.
emotional body, your physical
Mhm.
body. So let's get into the doshas because I
Yes.
think if like we really understand
Yeah.
what our dosha is,
Yeah.
and from there use
Yeah.
that knowledge to say, okay, how do I balance in my whatever it is, right? Like if I need
Yes.
more heat or
Yeah.
coolness.
Yeah. Okay, let's do it. All right. So the doshas are the physical manifestation of the elements in our world, right? And so vata is comprised of air and space, so we just think of it as the air dosha. That's the king dosha. It rules communication and movement. Your hormones, that's how your body communicates with itself. Your nervous system, that's how your body communicates with itself. Every form of communication is a vata interaction. Every
Mm.
form of movement, like your joints moving, your mouth moving, like in speech is a big vata thing, communication. Vata rules all speaking and sound. So your ears, your mouth, everything that moves in your body, which think about that, like not just your joints, but when your colon moves, when your
Mm.
heart moves, like those, that's movement in your body. And that's what Vata rules. It's because it's air and you can't contain air, you can't capture air. It's the dosha that is the most difficult to appease. It's always the first one that gets its feathers ruffled. And in fact, Vata is always the first one to have its feathers ruffled. And then if it gets too ruffly, it goes over and is like, hey, hey, you should also be ruffled about this.
Oh,
And
oh
and then the
wow.
other two, like they get ruffled because Vata is also ruffled. So we're always like so much of Ayurveda is focused on keeping Vata pacified and happy. But it's an important one. It's called the King dosha. It's the element of air that we think about.
Mm.
Then we have Pitta. Pitta is fire and water, but you can think of it as the fire element. And that rules transformation. It rules heat. It rules creativity, intelligence, digestion. Pitta is what rules all of the hardest labor elements, like mental labor, digestive labor. It takes food and turns it into energy. It turns it into the building blocks for your life. It's creativity, it's cheerfulness, it's intelligence, and it's emotion. It also rules the heart. So all of your strong emotions, whether that be anger or joy, Pitta rules those across the board. And then we have Kapha. Kapha is the queen element. Kapha is the earth. She is earth and water specifically. So you can think of her like sticky tree sap, like maple syrup. That is
Mhm.
Kapha, if you could put it into a physical thing. She's the structure, she's the moistness, she's youth and vitality and patience, forbearance. She's just sweet and eternal. She's your muscles, she's the fat that protects your neurons, your organs. She's the reproductive system that gives new life. That's kapha. And so she is structure and solidity, and this concept of vitality is kapha. So those are the three doshas, and they rule the body. You can feel them in the weather, in the air, and they rule different times of day. So, regardless of whether you sleep at night and are awake during the day, if some people work at night, so regardless of what your cycle is in terms of working, the hours of the day as they break down from 6 to 10, both AM and PM, 6 to 10, is
Okay.
kapha time. Those are times of rest. Those are times of repose. Those are times where it's good to have a little bit of physical activity. Um, you can do yoga, you can go for a jog. It's good to stimulate the body, but it's also good to rest during that time. You should not be looking at screens. You, um, or if you are, do it closer to the 10 a.m. mark when we're going into pitta time.
Yeah.
Or if you're trying to go to sleep, definitely stay away from the screen. But it is a time of being in your body, mostly during the kapha time. Pitta time is from 10 to 2, both AM and PM. And that is when we do our biggest labors, whether that's digestive labor, like at night. That is when our immune system is most active, like when we're sleeping. 10 to 2, if you have a corporate job, that is probably when you're getting the most of your work done during the day, right? Like those are your hard working hours where you're doing all your mental labor. It's also when you should be eating your biggest meal during pitta time. If you eat animal protein is the hardest to digest, and you should be eating the heaviest, most difficult to digest foods during pitta time when pitta is strongest. So that is a focused time from 10 to 2, both AM and PM. And then Vata rules the hours of 2 to 6, both AM and PM. So that is the time when we should be social. That is the time where we should have time for like unstructured elements of the day, where we might be running errands, we might be playing with the kids, we might be, if again, if you're in a corporate job, that's a good time to catch up on all your emails, on all your social media. If you're active on LinkedIn, like do that kind of stuff during Vata time. You do your hard mental labor during the Pitta time, and you do your unstructured creative work, so to speak, during Vata time, right? Um, at nighttime, between 2 and 6 a.m., when we're sleeping, theoretically, is also when we're most active in our dreaming. So Vata rules dreams in that way. And that's a really cool kind of concept of if you do your mental labor during the day, like from 10 to 2, then
Yeah.
have your dream time, your creative time, your unstructured time, your daydreaming time in the afternoon. So it can work both ways, like when you're dreaming during your sleep or when you're dreaming during your waking state. How does that feel for you? Does that resonate?
It does. And it makes me think that our days are completely structured backwards.
Yes.
Like you talked about the unstructured time. And if I think my kids,
Yeah.
typically after school, there's still
Yeah.
structured time because you're either doing sports or you're a part of some extracurricular
Yeah.
activity. And so it's almost like structure carries into close to dinner time sometimes.
Yeah.
And then even the way we eat. I mean, we have our
Dinner is
heaviest
the heaviest
meal
time.
at night.
Yeah.
But it's funny because after hearing your talk where you mentioned a lot of these things, I really started to think much more about how I was eating, what I was eating. I was testing out, okay, what if I got up at 4 or 5 a.m.? I meditated because
Yeah.
I've heard that meditation is typically the strongest around that time because
Yeah.
you can be more connected to spirit.
Yeah.
I always complain about not being able to do it later. So let me get it out of the way, essentially in the
Yeah.
morning when everyone's up, still sleeping.
Hmm.
Then I did a workout because it was very Vata time,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And then I was really thinking about eating a lot more in the middle of the day, whereas
Yeah.
I would sometimes skip lunch. And
Yeah.
or I would snack and I would say, I'm going to save room in my belly for dinner time because
Yeah.
I know that's the biggest.
Yeah.
And then after hearing you, I was like, oh no, that's all backwards. I should
Yeah.
actually be eating a lot lighter.
Yeah.
But I do feel guilty about that because my kids are eating
Yeah.
heavier at night.
Yeah.
Then I'm
Yeah.
usually like, I'll just have some soup or something. It's a lighter thing.
Yeah.
So it's funny how our schedules can be a little backwards.
Yeah. And that is, think about back in the day before the Industrial Revolution. Think about how that was structured. And some countries still do structure it that way, where they take 2 hour lunches, and that's normal. We look at productivity studies that are done today, and the ideal working hours are 5. Nobody really puts in more than 5 productive hours a day, right?
Yeah.
The other 3 are filled with food and bathroom breaks and water cooler conversations and maybe a few emails or Slack communications, but not a whole lot of what we would consider productive work. And it's because our biology isn't designed to be mentally productive for 8 hours a day. We can be physically productive for 8 hours a day. We can be physically productive for 10 or 12 is pushing it. But when you think about physical labor versus mental labor, and that is when you get into physical labor, that is kapha and vata. Like kapha is the marathon runner. She can just go forever. And vata always has so much energy, right? But when you think about mental labor, that's pitta. And the fire can only burn for so long before it needs a break. Can only cook for so long. So when we think about things that way, and what kind of labor are you doing? What do you want to produce with your time? And then you individually, are you more of a kapha? Are you more of a pitta? Are you more of a vata, right? And we're all born with this. We all have all 3 of them in us. It's a pie chart that we all have. And when you're born, you have your version of the pie chart, whether you're 40% pitta and then 30% vata and 30% kapha, or 6% kapha, 10% vata, and 30% pitta, right? So it breaks down individually for each of us in some way, shape, or form. And that's what we would call our prakriti, which is our innate balance of the doshas that we have inside of us. But Ayurvedic practitioners are always looking at what's called the vrikriti, which is the current state of imbalance.
Mm.
So even if you are a more kaphic person by nature, you might be actively dealing with a pitta imbalance. And so then you're not necessarily like, oh, I'm a kapha, so I have to eat this way. You have to think of it as, oh man, there's a lot of pitta in me right now. There's a lot of fire. Maybe it's also summer, so there's heat all around, and I am really suffering from some pitta imbalances. So then throw out the I'm eating this way or I'm living this way because I'm kaphic by nature. No,
Mm.
what you're dealing with right now in this moment is pitta, right? And so a big part of Ayurveda is being aware of this flow and this transition. So that way it's not so much this rigid, I'm a this, I have to do that. It's a, what is the state of the elements in me right now in this exact moment, and how do I either lean in to that flow or tip the scale consciously in the other direction, right? And so you were talking about your kids and having sports after
Yeah.
school and unstructured time. Well, if they're running around, if they're doing arts and crafts, like even though it's a structured,
Okay.
activity, they are unstructured in their movements. They're not having to sit and focus. They're having unstructured mental time if they're painting, if they're like in an art class, right? All you have to do is create something in that time, but what you paint or how you paint it and the colors that you use, like that's really
I
unstructured.
see. Okay.
Running around chasing a soccer ball, that is some prime Vata energy right there.
Okay.
You
Okay.
know? So yeah, and I also want to dig into when we think about heaviness for the meals. Westerners tend to equate heaviness with largeness.
Mm.
Um, so what we think of in Ayurveda as heavy is difficult to digest. So
Oh, okay.
you can have a large meal at night, but it can all be things that are very easily digested,
Got it.
right? A lot of fresh greens, a lot of like easily digested grains, plant sources of protein, right?
Mm.
So quinoa and amaranth, lentil soup, that's great at night as you're getting ready to go to bed. But pitta, like the heaviness, the harder things to digest, would be things that have gluten in them, would be animal sourced foods like your dairy, your cheeses, your animal meats. Those are all notoriously difficult to break down. Things that are heavy in your system. If you're going to eat them at all, you should eat
Right.
them in the midday. And if you're thinking of calories, a big salad isn't going to be as calorie dense as a whole bunch of grains or a sandwich or a slice of pizza. Like, we don't want to have pizza at night. We want to have pizza midday because pizza is very difficult to digest. So that's how you want to think about it. Heaviness in terms of the digestibility, not necessarily in terms of size.
That's a great differentiating point there because I was totally equating it to largeness.
Yeah.
And I think I saw that in the book as I was skimming. It's more about how heavy a meal is. And
Yeah.
I mean, we've all probably felt it, right? Like after you
Yeah.
have Thanksgiving is the like
Yeah.
prime example, right? Like that
Yeah.
is heaviest
It
meal
is.
you can have. And most people have it a lot later in the day.
Right.
So thank you for clarifying that. I
Of
think that's
course.
super helpful
Yeah.
because now I'm like, okay, maybe it's not so bad to be eating at 6 o'clock or seven. And as
Yeah.
long as I'm eating the right things and
Right.
picking the
Yeah.
right stuff. But I want to go back to knowing your dosha type. Like
Sure. Yeah.
how do we figure this out? And
Yeah.
also, how do we know when we need to bring the other dosha into balance?
Okay. How do we know our own dosha? So there's three ways you can go about doing this. There are quizzes online. Some of them are
Okay.
good, some of them are not good, but there are plenty of quizzes that you can take online, and that will give you a certain level of a response. And that's also just learning what each dosha is and seeing what resonates with you. If I think about Vata is air, it's very communicative, it's very social, it's very extroverted. Vata people tend to be smaller, like they tend to be thinner, they tend to have less muscle mass. They tend to have dark hair, like the color black is the Vata color. So if you
Oh,
have
okay.
dark hair, maybe if you bruise easily, like those are some Vata things. Pitta tends to be like more of an athletic build. They tend to have natural redness in their cheeks and their ears and their nose, maybe. They have this reddishness to them. They tend to be very intelligent and focused. Think of an Ivy League person who also plays football. That
Got
is
it.
like a Pitta archetype. People who are very driven can also be somebody who has anger management issues. Those are
Mm.
Pitta things that one can relate to. And kapha being this very nurturing, and that doesn't mean male, like men can also be nurturing. It doesn't have to be entirely female,
Yeah.
but this ability to be centered, ability to be grounded, ability to know thyself, to be patient, those are kaphic qualities. And so people tend to resonate with one more than the other. So you can lean in and be like, oh, yeah, that's my body type. Oh, yeah, that is how my
Right.
mind operates. That is how my personality is. Oh, yeah, I am more of like a kapha person. Kapha people tend to be a little rounder. They tend to have more curve on their body, a little bit more stout. The second way to do it is to have an Ayurvedic practitioner take your pulse, and we'll be able to tell fairly accurately what your dosha is. And we'd also be able to tell you what your current imbalances are. So having your pulse read is a really good way, and you'll get a lot of details that way. But the cheat version,
Yeah.
which you and I talked about, and which is really
Oh, yeah.
fun. So in India, actually, it's very common to have astrologers on staff in Ayurvedic clinics because there's
Oh.
an Ayurvedic belief that you can't fully know a person's dosha, like their pie chart that they had at birth. You can't fully know what their specific pie chart is without looking at their astrology chart.
Mm.
That especially if they came into the world in really chaotic circumstances, if there was a C-section, if they were born in a place of violence where war is going on, if there were drugs as part of the pregnancy, like drug use as part of the pregnancy, that can throw off even a baby's pulse. And
Oh.
so that the only way to truly know what their prakriti is by looking at the stars.
Mm.
And so, really good Ayurvedic clinics in India will have an astrologer on staff. So, what I like to tell people is I like to go to Cafe Astrology because that's my
Yeah.
preferred free natal chart website. So, Cafe Astrology, you put in your birth information and it'll populate your natal chart. And when you're scrolling through the information that it gives you, there'll be like this little chart section where it says you have four earth elements, you have
Right.
three fire elements. It's giving you right then and there. You have kapha as a primary, pitta as a secondary, and then vata at the bottom. And water, because it's going to give you air, earth, fire, and water,
Right.
water factors for both kapha and pitta, right?
Oh, okay. So that's how you read that.
Yeah, water gets combined with pitta and kapha, with earth and fire. And then it's also going to say you have three cardinal and two mutable and
Right.
whatever fixed, right? So cardinal is pitta, mutable is vata, and fixed is kapha. So if you look at that, just see what your numbers are in your natal chart, and that will basically give you your pie chart. And some people will be pretty evenly matched. We call them tridoshic, where you're like within 10%. You're basically an even 30-30-30 split.
Okay.
And some people, like myself, so I have the most pitta, but then kapha, earth is like right behind there. Like there's a difference of one between fire and
Mhm.
earth in my chart. And I'm pitta kapha by nature. And so you can say that. You don't necessarily always have to be one. And some people are a true pitta, a true vata, a true kapha. There are, I think, a lot of us, especially here in the West, as we're such a melting pot, I
Mm.
think we tend to resonate with, oh, I'm a vata pitta. Oh, I'm a
Mm.
pitta kapha. And you can even be a vata kapha, even though vata and kapha are exact opposites on the spectrum. Like there is nothing more opposite than earth and air. I know plenty of people who are vata kapha, where they're kapha in their mind and their heart and vata in their body, or vice versa, right? And so you can have this mix. So as you're checking out your own chart, if you take a quiz, if you find you're like, oh, I resonate with this one, but like this one also still sounds like me, you could be Pitta Kapha, Vata Pitta, Pitta Vata. You can mingle like that, right? I have extraordinarily little air in my chart. It's very heavy on earth and fire. So you can see that, right?
So then would that mean that you need to be more aware about balancing your air or bringing it into
Yeah. So
okay.
because I'm so heavy on earth and fire, I'm more likely to aggravate those. I have a natural tendency to like earth and fire things.
Mm.
And so I do have to be aware of, okay, you've had a lot of earth this week. You've been eating a lot of earthy foods, which would be sweet foods, which would
Mhm.
be heavy foods, which would be your ice cream. Pizza is a pitta food.
Yes.
So acidic foods, sour foods. So I have to be conscious about bringing air into my life, which is the opposite of what a lot of people have. A lot of people spend time limiting the air that they bring in. I have to be a little bit more conscious about bringing it in. I have to be conscious about I can still have my earth foods, my sweet foods, but I have to be very conscious about limiting them. I can
Mm,
still have my sour and my acidic foods, but I have to be aware. So a lot of times when people eat sour foods or too much, they get too much pitta in them, they might have acid reflux. That's a very
mhm.
common pitta imbalance. So if you're starting to feel in your digestion in your body spiciness, sourness, acidicness, acid reflux, start to feel irritable, cranky, those are signs of too much pitta in your body. Having a lack of patience, like a hey, snap to it, that's a
Yeah.
pitta thing, right? If you start to feel heavy, if you're sluggish, depression, just bed rot, we call it these days. That's a real kapha thing. Lack of motivation, those are kaphic things. Obviously, weight gain and carrying excessive weight to a point where it's unhealthy, that's a kapha thing. Vata, when you're anxious, when you are unsettled, if you're constipated, if things feel jittery in you, you have trouble falling asleep. Those are real vata imbalances. So then you're like, oh, I have too much air. Like there have been times in my life where I cannot fall asleep to save my life. And I'm like, dang, I really got some air in my mind right now, and I
Mm,
gotta do some things to balance out the air that's specifically in my mind so that I can start falling asleep. And that's when herbs come in, is when we're
mm.
really working to balance that imbalance. But those are things that you can start to really notice because those are tangible. Like, what's your mood right now? How energetic do you feel? How irritated do you feel? What's the state of your digestion? Is there a thing hanging out in your gut that's just not moving? Is there heat? Is there sourness? Are you burping acid? Like those are signs of imbalance in the body that are really intimate. And some of your
Right.
first cues, you don't have to wait until you get to what an allopathic doctor would consider a diagnosable element. You just have to look at, oh, this is what I'm feeling right now, and be able to associate it with that's fire, that's air, that's earth. And now I want to balance it the other direction.
Yeah. And as I'm hearing you talk, I'm thinking I'm definitely Vata, but I also have that Pitta. I think it's a Vata Pitta for me. And
Yeah.
the patience and the slow moving and the meditation piece, like
Yeah.
slowing down is so hard for me.
Yeah. It would
And
be.
I have to tell myself, I mean, the fact that I wake up and I have to consciously be like, you know what?
Yeah.
There's nothing to do at 4 a.m. other than sit,
Meditate.
put a candle on, and everyone's asleep. No one's
Yeah.
expecting anything of me. Like,
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
be my, I guess, kapha time. But yeah, so I think I've always known that, just
Hmm.
probably unconsciously, that I need a lot
Yeah.
more grounding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
So I like that. And I guess the other thing that I think about with this is, does your dosha change within the day? Because I can just, for example, you mentioned irritability, right?
Yeah.
I can get pretty like frustrated and irritable. It can vary. Like some days I'm better
Yeah.
than others, but other days it can happen really quickly. So does that mean like in that moment I just have a
Yeah.
lot more
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
but
Exactly.
then it might change a few hours later. I don't know.
Yeah. So that pie chart that you're born with that never
Yeah.
changes, that's your prakriti. That's how you came into the world. That is your version of homeostasis.
Mm.
But your vrikriti changes every moment, with
Oh, okay.
every, and so when you say, does your dosha change? Well, your vrikriti changes. Your vrikriti changes with every meal, with every social interaction. Did this person bring me joy,
Mm.
frustration, or sadness? Like social engagements, social interactions affect the elements. If somebody has anger management issues or anger issues, that pitta imbalance, that we balance that socially, right? With things that bring them joy.
Right.
And we teach them how to balance that anger, right? So social interactions impact your dosha. Anything that impacts your emotions, your mind, your body, the weather, right? The weather impacts our dosha. So if it's cold and rainy out, like it is the entire month of April, that is most Kaphic month of the year because it's just cold and rainy the whole time. And
Mm.
that can make it hard for us to get out of bed. Like we want soup like
Yes.
nice soups, which is the kapha food is soup. Of so many different varieties. So you naturally want to balance that because it's cold and rainy and you're like, I can't get out of bed. And so that might be a time where you really have to force yourself to go work out that day. But you might also naturally be drawn to things that will balance it. We tend to eat more fruit in summer. Fruit tends to be sweet. That helps to balance out fire. That helps to balance out the fire that's all around us, all of this heat, those cooling fruits. You also have sour fruits like strawberries and blueberries and all of the berries that have acidity in them. And so they're not the most pitta balancing. Sometimes they can even be pitta aggravating. Like some people have a problem with sour fruits versus sweet fruits, and that
Right.
depends on where their pitta is. So, yes, your dosha changes every moment of every day based on your feeling, based on what's going on in your world, based on what you're eating, and based on the weather. And also time of day. What do you feel like doing? There are natural times of the day where we're tired, where we're hungry, where we're motivated, and those are vata, pitta, kapha at play in our day.
Right. That makes sense. And that actually gives me hope because I think if I'm aware enough to know that one of these is out of balance,
Yeah,
then it can either be eating something that would counterbalance it
yeah,
or doing something that's much more in that other dosha type.
yeah,
So it brings me hope knowing that, okay, I have the ability to change it. And it's not
yeah,
like I'd have to go to sleep and wait for the next
right.
day for a
No,
fresh start, but
yeah,
rather it's very fluid.
yeah. And that's the key with Ayurveda. You don't necessarily have to become an Ayurvedic herbalist. You don't have to necessarily go down this deep rabbit hole and become a professional. You just have to be aware. I think that those of us who are the best with Ayurveda are those of us who are just the most self-aware. And
Mm,
we've developed this ability to very acutely discover in ourselves, oh, I'm feeling this, that's air. And so I'm going to take a deep breath and balance that. Like some people get to the point where you're not even balancing it with food, you're balancing it with just awareness, where you
mm.
have this ability to take a breath and say, okay, I'm going to let that go. Or, okay, I'm going to counteract my anxiety with peace. I'm going to counteract my anxiety with joy. And you can develop this self awareness where you're self soothing in this very active way throughout the day. And I think those are the most balanced people. And they're not all doctors, they're not all Ayurvedic practitioners. They're just the most self aware.
Right. It's knowing the basics and then just being able to apply them in the
Yeah,
right way.
yeah, exactly.
Okay. And how do we adjust for the seasons?
Yeah,
Because I know each dosha is also representative of the different seasons. And
yes,
you mentioned eating fruits in the summer, right? I
yeah,
think that's such a wonderful example because
yeah,
I naturally feel
yes.
like I don't want anything hot. Like I'm looking
No,
for cucumber and watermelon and
yes,
ice cream and like whatever is
yes.
going to cool me down. Um,
Yeah. No, okay, definitely. So spring is the season of kapha. It's when
okay.
things are wet and muddy and sticky and new life is beginning. And kapha is youth, it's vitality, it's new growth. So spring is kapha. Summer is pitta. It's hot, right?
Yeah.
Here in New England, it is hot and humid, which is the most pitta thing. If you live in an area that is hot and dry, then you're having pitta vata summers. So you also
Oh,
have to be
okay.
aware that vata brings in dryness. So if you're hot and humid, that's pitta. If you're hot and dry, that's pitta vata. And so you might have to do something to counteract all of that dryness.
Mm,
Going into autumn, autumn is change. Pitta rules change. It tends to be drier in some areas, it tends to be wetter in others. So Pitta is still ruling autumn in a major way as things shift and transform. But be aware because fall, you can really become tridoshic. It can be wet
mm,
one day, especially here in New England. Like we'll get our
yeah.
first nor'easters. So that's kapha coming in. And it can be really windy, which is vata. Vata is the wind. So autumn, I find you can be really tridoshic, but it's traditionally ruled by Pitta because Pitta rules transformation and change. Then we get into winter. Classically, winter is ruled by Vata. It's cold and it's dry. That is the most Vata thing, cold and dry. It's windy. If you live in an area that has really wet winters, then it's Vata Kapha.
Okay.
So you're being aware of the traditional rulers don't always make sense for where you're living specifically. It's going to be different if you live on the equator versus in a desert versus in Canada versus in Egypt. Your geographic location will vary. And so whenever something is wet, whenever something is humid, that moisture is coming in through kapha, sometimes through pitta. Dryness comes in through vata. Coldness comes in through both vata and kapha. Heat comes in through pitta. So dryness, wetness, cold, and hot. It's like a little cross diagram. And you
Right.
kind of plot where you are on that chart based on
Mhm.
the weather.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think
Yeah.
the combination of the different types
Yeah.
resonates with me versus like you're solely one.
Yeah.
And I think when you're talking about using astrology to look at your dosha makeup, that's something I use so often when I do birth chart readings and when I look at clients' charts.
Yeah.
It's at such a fundamental level.
Yeah.
The elements is something we don't necessarily talk about so often, but I love going back to it because it's really simple to understand. And I
It
think
is.
we intrinsically know what air is, what
Yeah.
water be, and
Yeah.
fire and so forth. So having that little combination there, I think makes it easy to be able to navigate from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's very true. And you do see this in Western astrology too, like the elements, the signs. Like you're never just one sign. When we
Yeah.
ask people what their sign is, well, that's just their sun sign. But I think you and I both know that like
Yeah.
rising and moon are very important. And midheaven, I mean, come on, that dictates who you become in life, right?
Yes.
And so there's so many signs to talk about, right? And how they each play in that specific nuanced role. And the further down you go with the rabbit hole, you learn this richness. And I think Ayurveda is the same way. You learn this richness.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else that you would love to share, like for anyone that would want to try this out for themselves
Yeah.
or start getting into Ayurveda? I have to tell you, funny enough, because I just got into the topic, but I'm the type of person that loves to look at my tongue when I wake up in the morning.
Yes.
And this was something, okay, there's a little bit of a backstory because people are
Yeah.
probably like, what? I went to see a Tweena therapist many, many years ago, and it was
Yes.
my first time meeting them. And in my intake form,
Yeah.
the first thing they said to me was, stick out your tongue. And I was embarrassed. I'm like, why do they need to see my tongue? Like, what? I'm like, I brushed my teeth. Like, what's
Yeah.
going on? What's here? So they looked at my tongue and they completely knew what was going on with me. And I felt so vulnerable and like
Yeah.
exposed by my tongue.
Yeah.
So ever since then, I've really had this interest of what does the tongue tell us? And
Yeah.
you can look online and there are a ton of, I actually
Yes.
have a screenshot of a photo that I keep in my phone to always
Yeah.
analyze my own tongue. But long story short, I ended up getting one of these Ayurvedic tongue scrapers.
Yes.
And I'm looking forward to trying it. It still hasn't arrived. I got it from Etsy, but it still hasn't arrived. But anyway, like I said, I was going off topic, but that was one of the things that I thought of. And then,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh my God. Well, be ready for your life to totally transform with that tongue scraper.
I'm so excited.
Like now when I'm traveling and I don't have my tongue scraper, my mouth just doesn't feel clean anymore. I've completely gotten spoiled with my years of usage of a tongue
Yeah.
scraper. So, yes, we do look at the tongue. The Chinese paradigm goes much deeper than Ayurveda with, oh, there's this little bump in the tongue, or there's a little bit more white here, it's a little bit more yellow here. And they break things down by the organ systems
Yes.
in Chinese. Like they have the 12 spirits that and every one of the 12 is one of the organs, like the stomach, the colon, the spleen, the liver, the heart. And that's what they feel in your pulse. They
Right.
feel your intestine, they feel your stomach when they're taking a pulse. And they'll do face reading because, like, there are different parts of the face that map to the different organs, different parts of the
Mhm.
tongue that map to the different organs. In Ayurveda, we're just feeling the elements. We don't break it down so much by organ, we break it down very distinctly vata, pitta, kapha, and oh, there's the emotional part of pitta. There's the blood part of pitta, the part that purifies the blood, that cleans the blood, which would be your spleen and your liver and whatnot in scientific terms. But Ayurveda didn't break it down quite like that. And so we feel the different parts of the doshas when we take a pulse. But we do look at your tongue because that's a very good way to gauge how much toxin you have in your body and how strong is your digestion. So when our digestion is strong and things are not coming back up, like we don't have a good coating, like you don't want your tongue to be super coated. It should be pink, it should be red, right?
Mm.
When it starts to get coated with white or yellow, that means that digestion is not very strong. That means that the fire is being suppressed. So that's when an Ayurvedic person looks at your tongue, because the white and the yellow is something that we call ama. Ama is a generic term for toxin, and it can be everything from endocrine disrupting toxins that are found in our modern living, like glyphosate and DDT and things like that. Ama can be undigested or poorly digested food. It could also be depression. It could be emotional ama,
Oh,
spiritual
interesting.
spiritual ama, which is like
Mm.
bad karma. So ama is just this very generic term for toxin, and it encompasses everything from chemical to the spiritual. But we look at the tongue to say how good is your digestion, right? And we also feel that in the pulse, but sometimes the visual is helpful, especially if we're looking for white versus yellow. Most
Yeah.
people have a white coating, and that's too much kapha. That's because we have a lot of processed sweet foods here in the States. So it's very common for people to have a white coating. And that's one of the ways that I tell in the morning, like, oh, did I properly digest everything from yesterday? Your tongue in the morning is going to tell you how you
Yes.
did the day before. So you take a look, you see how much whiteness it is. If there's some yellowness, that means pitta is creeping in. That means that your pH is imbalanced and that you might be getting some acid reflux. You might have some irritation in your bowels where there's some bile, there's some sourness there. But then you scrape your tongue and you get all of that coating off, and your mouth just feels so amazing. And we also say that that helps your sense of taste. And the sense of taste is so important because that's one of the primal intelligences of the body. You know how we were talking about how we innately kind of crave these foods to
Yeah.
balance out the seasons and the elements? Well, when your sense of taste is very refined, then you naturally will be more able to select the foods that are going to balance you. It's less aware and more intuitive, more instinctual when you have a good refined sense of taste. Like the bitterness, like you'll crave bitterness or astringentness to help dry you out when there's too much earth. You'll crave sweetness when there's too much air. And sweet doesn't have to be candy. Sweet is often grains. Like breads are sweet, and sweet fruits like apples have a lot of sugar in them. And a cooked apple is very vata balancing. So if you're feeling very anxious, if you have too much air, a cooked apple with a little bit of honey over it is just chef's kiss for balancing out, that moment and without bringing in toxin or a heavy sweetness. So yes, having a good clean tongue is so important for refining your palate. It helps to enliven your intuitive intelligence when you have a more refined sense of taste, and having a clean tongue is foundational. It's a prerequisite for refining that palate. So I'm so excited for you to start scraping your tongue. Like it's gonna be so awesome. You're gonna love it.
Oh, I'm gonna have to email you after about it. But the tongue refinement makes sense to me, but I just had no idea that in and of itself would allow you to crave the things that you truly need. I wasn't even aware about that.
It's
And
an
so,
Ayurvedic teaching that cleaning the tongue allows the intelligence to become more active.
mm,
And then as you are aware of it, you start to innately crave that which you need to balance yourself.
wow, that is
Yeah.
so cool. Like that alone
Right. Don't
is
we all
enough.
want that?
That alone is enough to get the tongue scraper, which now I feel like
Yes.
I should have gotten it like years ago.
No,
But okay,
we should
you know
have
what?
them as children. It should be, I don't know why dentists don't hand out tongue scrapers. Like that should be a thing. I
Oh,
just,
okay. Now I have stocking stuffers to get my whole family. It's like
yes.
gonna be like, "What?" Actually, my kids would probably love doing it because I think if it's new and it's, like,
Yeah.
different, And they're little enough where they probably wouldn't criticize me. Like, why are you getting me this?
Yeah, no, it's so good.
But as you were talking about the bitterness piece, I had a thought because I would say normally I don't really drink alcohol, but sometimes I do crave the bitterness of
Yeah,
beer or the bitterness of
yeah,
like the wine. There's that
yeah,
acidity, like,
yeah.
and I was thinking about it as I was prepping for this call. I'm like, I wonder if that is also associated in some way to my dosha is craving it as well.
Yeah. So our mind associates it with what we know, right? So like the more
Oh,
things that
okay.
we know, like if we know alcohol, like the
Yeah.
craving is for the acid, the craving is for the bitter,
Mm.
but our mind associates it with what's most common and most familiar. So trying a bunch of different things, like do I crave alcohol and all that alcohol brings, the bitterness, the sourness, but also the imbalance, the loss of sense, like the this liquid is going to force me to let go in this way,
Mm.
right? Or do I just want the bitterness?
Mm.
Because having bitters, and this is not something that we really do in the West, but it's very common in other countries, having like a tincture of bitters or having some bitter things to eat before a meal, like arugula. Like some people will just eat arugula before a
Mm.
meal because it's a really bitter green and that stimulates digestion. Bitter flavors bring in air. Bitterness and astringency bring in air really strongly into the body, and that helps to stoke the fires of digestion. Fire needs air to work. And so
Oh.
having bitter, and scientifically, it stimulates bile, it stimulates the liver, it stimulates the gallbladder, doing all of these different things. The stomach juices to get ready for digestion, especially the ones that really digest the heavy foods, like bitter stimulates that. And so having something bitter before a meal, whether it's like a tincture of herbs in bitters or just having something that tastes bitter, like arugula, right
Mm.
before you go into a meal. And a lot of herbs do have a bitterness to them. And it's
Yeah.
healing, it's stimulating, it's sparking. You can't have an outcome without movement. Something has to move, something has to change. So you need both fire and air to move to a new space. Kapha are stagnant, they're going to stay right there. It's inertia. But air and fire bring change. They bring movement and they bring change and transformation. So bitter is the element of air and space that's very vata, and that brings in that movement. It stimulates that fire.
Okay. I'm definitely going to try that. I like the idea of having something bitter, and I had no
Yeah,
idea that would help to stoke the fire.
yeah, yeah,
That's very insight.
definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, I have a ton of sage growing in my garden, and sage is pretty bitter. I tried making like a tea with sage, and I was like, this needs a lot of sugar. I think if I were to take it for just what it is and know that it
Yeah,
has its purpose, I'm not going to down a full glass of this, but I
yeah,
take a sip before my
yeah.
meal to get myself ready.
You could also think about mixing the sage with licorice. Licorice is a really good natural sweetener. It's
Okay.
actually more sweet than sugar is in
Oh.
terms of like its content, but it doesn't spike our blood sugar in the way that sugar does. It doesn't come in and wreak havoc on our body in the way that sugar does. And sage is very bitter. It brings in a lot of air. It's very clearing and clarifying. Licorice
Mm.
is also very good for the respiratory system and our bronchial tubes. So having a little bit of licorice and sage together, I think you might find that very interesting to have around your meditations because it would bring in a lot of air energy, specifically the upward moving air, what we call udana. And udana is very important for supporting meditation and higher states of consciousness. You have to have clear, strong breath in order to advance in the spiritual sense. Prana and Udana. Prana meaning the first movement, first air. It's what the Vedic peoples call like energy. We think of it like as your aura, as your energy. They call it prana. And what supports next to prana is Udana. That's the air in our lungs. That's the air that we exhale when we talk and speak. And Udana needs to support prana in the mind.
Mm.
So, having a clear respiratory system, which the sage and the licorice would support, would also translate to clarity of mind in theory. depending on the individual, but that would be a way that you could think of it.
Wow. Okay. So many cool things to try now, like lots of
Yeah.
stuff.
I think one last pro
Yeah.
tip or one other that like everybody has to know, or maybe two, these are my biggest ones.
Okay.
So starting the day with warm water, a little bit of lemon and a little bit of honey. Drinking warm water, sipping warm water throughout the day is the best thing to combat ama. It's the best thing to support digestion. It's just the Ayurvedic hack for everything. If you have ice cream, if you eat something that is really sitting in your belly, just drink warm water. Just sip it. Not a whole lot. Don't glug it down. Just sip here and there warm water throughout the day. But starting the day with warm water with lemon and honey, it's very balancing and it stimulates digestion. It helps you have your first bowel movement. It helps wake you up. Yes, all of those things are true. But here's the thing that doesn't get talked about very often, that warm water really helps to stimulate the release of something called BDNF, brain derived neurotropic factor. And that is a protein that our body creates. And warm liquids like water help to stimulate the release and the creation of this in our bodies. And this factors into our metabolism, this factors into our mood, like it defends and protects against depression. It's critical in the formation of muscle tissue. It's such an important protein that our body makes and
Mm,
releases. And drinking cold things spikes cortisol, it spikes the stress hormones, and that immediately decreases the release and the production of BDNF. Whereas drinking warm things and staying hydrated shifts it exactly in the opposite direction. It's like a teeter-totter. So that's going to reduce cortisol and stimulate the release and production of BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor, into the body, which is going to help with metabolism. It's going to help with mood. It's going to help with muscle formation and maintaining muscle formation, like once you have gained those gains. And so that's one thing that I really would love for people to know about and understand. It really is this teeter-totter of cold and hot, of vata and kapha, and stress hormone versus feel-good hormone,
mm,
or feel-good protein, I should say. And then the other thing is that it's so important when we go to bed, how we go to bed. There's an Ayurvedic saying that the day begins the night before. How you wake up and how you feel when you wake up is dictated by how you go to bed the night before. Our brains typically produce the most amount of melatonin, which is the sleep hormone, between 8 and 10 p.m. And we want to ride that wave. We want to go to bed by 10 p.m. when melatonin is peaking because that empowers us to stay asleep throughout the night without having to wake up, without being restless, without losing sleep. And because if we are able to ride that melatonin wave, we're going to go deeper into stage 4, which is better for our immune systems. So if you're able to get some really good quality stage 4 sleep, that's going to impact how strong your immune system is, which
mm,
then dictates how well you are in your waking state experience. It's going to give us more time in REM, in dream sleep, which is really important for your brain's organization. When we lose just a half hour of sleep, the neurons start to shrink, they pull back. And if a neuron connection breaks, that's a memory being lost. That's something in your mind being forgotten. Every single thought that you've ever had, every single memory that you have is its own unique neuron train. No two are alike, right? So every single memory, every single thought that you've ever had is a specific formula of neurons in your brain. And if one of those neuron connections breaks, you risk losing that literal train of thought. And yeah, you can regrow it. It can be reformed, especially really prime core memories that are going to have multiple different ways that kind of connect it and you can remember it from a different way. But sleep is so critical to our health, to our mental well being. And just a half hour and those neurons start to shrink and break apart. That's so powerful to know. Like when you think
Mm.
about, like I sometimes think that getting sleep is more important than working out. And some people might come for me in the comments on that one, and that's okay. We can have that debate, but because it is a debate, right?
Yeah.
Um, and and I'm happy to be proven wrong. But I think in some ways having that sleep is more critical for your health than having a perfect diet or having a perfect exercise routine, because it's affecting your immune system, it's affecting your brain, it affects your organs' ability to function. Like that, I think is one of the most core things to health is sleep. And it's one of the first things that we sacrifice in life.
Yeah. I just think that's much more of a Western thing,
Oh, it is. It is.
probably because, and I talk about this a lot, which is there's this belief that if we're not producing, if we're not
Yeah.
moving and going, and that there's some laziness or lack of
Yeah.
productivity. And then
Mhm.
who are we if we're not actually creating? And
Yeah.
so there's this whole thing. And I think it stems from so many things. It's
Yeah.
societal, it's familial. So, yeah, I mean, you give up on the thing that we're just not aware because we're in dream state.
Yeah. You're unconscious for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I love those pro tips because I do the hot water. I try to do that regularly if I
Yeah.
can. And I'll go to restaurants and I'll say, please, no ice in my water.
Yeah.
Like
Okay.
ice
Yeah.
kind of hurts my insides, I would say.
Yes. I know. I
It
don't
really does. Yeah.
I don't want to drink cold things. No. And you
Oh,
shouldn't. The coldest thing you should ever drink is should be room temperature.
although I have a question on the cold piece because there's also a trend of doing ice baths and going from extremes, like the
Yeah.
really hot temperature
Yeah.
rooms to an ice bath. I don't know enough about
Yeah.
the benefits of it, but apparently there are health benefits. So,
Yeah.
what's your take on that?
So, yeah, and that's a really great and interesting question. So, that's not an Ayurvedic thing. Ayurveda would never recommend doing an extreme change like that,
Mm,
that we do gradual shifts, that we don't try and shock the body. But Ayurveda is not the authority on everything in life. It's a great paradigm, it's very rich, and it has a lot of wisdom to offer. The ice baths and the extreme changes like that is a traditionally Scandinavian health tip
yeah.
that comes from the Great North. And I think climate has a lot to do with that, right? India is typically a warmer place. Like there are definitely cold places. You know, we experience that here in New England.
Yeah.
People historically experience that in Northern Europe. And so when you shock the body like that, it does trigger a little bit of a stress response, like a tiny one. So doing it too much when doing it for women during certain times of the month, that might not be advised. If you're in a particularly shaky mental space, that kind of a shock might put you over the edge. If you're
Mm,
ill, you shouldn't do that. So it triggers a little bit of a stress response. It stimulates circulation because your body is like, I'm cold. And so the heart starts to pump that harder, tries to get blood throughout your body. And so it really gives you this burst of circulation, which then comes with a burst of energy, which then comes with a little bit of adrenaline, a little bit of cortisol. Your circulation gets heightened. So you feel this freshness, right? Coming throughout your whole body. And it's like invigorating and enlivening. And it's supposed to be like that because it's like your body's responding to this
yeah.
external stressor. And so doing an ice bath where you go outside in the winter without wearing a whole lot, you do this polar plunge kind of a thing. And there is a spiritual component to where that comes from, where death is cold, life is warm. And
Okay.
so the juxtaposition of your warm body against the coldness of death, it's supposed to help you feel more alive. It's supposed to help you revel in the joy of existence. And it's supposed to bring you closer, like you're cheating death or you're harmonizing with death in a sense that you can be next to death and still be good. So there's this purifying, this rebirthing, this cleansing element of it, of going back to the void of the spirit
Yeah.
world, because the spirit world is cold and dead. So brushing up against that, and then still being alive and still being in the world, and your senses get this burst of activity. So colors pop maybe a little differently, sounds are a little different. And so that's where I think the health benefits are coming from. I think there is definitely some value to it. I worry sometimes that it's a little too trendy, that people are doing it a little too much, especially when we submerge our organs. There's a lot of blood flow to and from the organs. The organs are often doing their thing throughout the day, and if we shock them with freezing temperatures, like you should never do a cold plunge when you have food in your belly. You know,
Mm, okay.
because then the
That
blood
makes sense.
flow is
Yeah,
going
yeah,
to
yeah.
go away from your organs where it's needed to do the digestive process, and it's going to go to your extremities. So I think there's a time and a place to do it, and being aware of, don't do it when you're digesting, don't do it when you're sick, don't do it when maybe you're going to be menstruating and your body doesn't necessarily need that stress, right? Maybe you want to do it after you work out, when your body's already warm, when there's already so much blood in your muscles, not in your organs, but like in your extremities, in your outer parts of your body, and to keep that circulation going, right? After you had this extraneous workout, like those might be good times to do it. I would not do it first thing in the morning because you need BDNF to be released into your body in the morning when you first wake up, and cold things are going to suppress the release of that in your body. It's going to spike cortisol first thing in the morning. I wouldn't do that, right? I would do it maybe like first thing in the evening, like around 6, maybe before a meal, or I would either do it before lunch or before dinner if I had a choice of merging Scandinavian practices with
Yeah,
Ayurvedic
yeah.
ones. So that's how I would look at it. If it works for you, then you should do it. I think that's also innate wisdom. Does this work for you? Give it a try, see how you feel. Yes, no, like I'm not going to do it. That's not a me thing.
I was gonna say I'm not doing a cold plunge anytime soon. So
No, no.
Ayurveda feels much more my speed,
Yeah.
and I like the gradual shifts.
Yeah.
And yeah, but
Yeah.
I'm so grateful for all of your wisdom and the pro tips
Yeah.
because, I think there's something that people who really want to give it a try can start small with warm water, being aware. And
Yeah.
I think there's a ton of material out there too for
Mhm.
people that are interested in exploring it a bit
Yes.
further. So
Yes.
I want to thank you for taking the time
Yeah.
to share and to be
It's
here.
been a treat.
And you're also a teacher at the Boston School of, it was
Herbal studies. And I'm the resident Ayurveda teacher there. So I lecture, I do Ayurvedic workshops. So if anybody's interested in furthering their education around herbal studies, and the Boston School is primarily a Western methodology in herbalism. If anybody's interested in learning more about herbs in general or diving into Ayurveda with me, they can find all of that through the Boston School of Herbal Studies, or connect with me on online. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram. Impact Botanicals is my line of Ayurvedic body care products. So please connect. I'd be happy to answer questions or chat about different things. And I hope that this was really useful and enlightening.
This was great. Thank you for listening. If you're interested in becoming a client and working with me, visit me at nunatherapy.com or follow me on social media at Nuna Therapy for regular content and inspiration. Until next time.